Welcome to DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. And today, Michael and I are here once again with a lovely special guest. He is the creator of Motion, formerly known as Framer Motion, is Matt Perry. Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thanks. Yeah, how are you both doing?
Good. Can't
Doing
complain. And we could have even recorded the episode like in the city, as like we're both based in Amsterdam. So maybe that's something for next time.
That might
could be
make more
fun.
sense. Yeah, other than my awful internet connection.
Just have to like bring Michael over here, over the big pond, as he's coming basically close to Toronto in here for today. So that might be the only hassle, but maybe we'll can get that going close to a conference or so. Who knows?
Oh, there you go. Next time, yeah.
Exactly.
That's pretty soon, isn't it?
I mean, there are a couple conferences coming up, right? But yeah, it's always difficult.
Yeah.
Nevertheless.
VueConf US is in a couple weeks.
True, VueConf US is coming up. JS Nation is coming up.
Yeah.
A lot of good conferences.
Always lots.
Wang me a few tickets and I'll be there.
we'll figure something out. Well, and also VConf's coming up in October. That could be also very interesting. I mean, that's in Amsterdam, so
Yeah,
that's hopefully see you around there. So yeah, today we want to talk about a library that a lot of people, especially in the React universe, know for ages. But now that it's framework agnostic, well, it can be known to all the JavaScript developers out there about Motion. Said before, formerly known as Framer Motion. But maybe before diving into that, Matt, can you tell us, how did you get into like programming after all? Like how did that unfold in the past?
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to go that far back. I guess, like as a kid, so I used to design my own little like gaming magazines on my desktop. I mean, we were talking when I'm 8 years old or something, and that progressed into making websites with Microsoft Front Page. And I didn't really get into like, I mean, really, we're talking like Pokemon website or something. And then with, I made a Zelda website, a fan site, which was like an actual, this was like more of a real thing rather than these like Word looking like documents that just link to each other. Mm-hmm. And I suppose as I got more serious about that, like I dip into the HTML. And at that point, I didn't even use CSS. It was all, how did we style things in those days? It was like, I feel
like images.
Maybe there was, yeah, I feel like it really was. It was like tables, table attributes, like border width and color.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And like, and also hotspots. You could like have an image that was basically half, your whole main nav, and then you could draw hotspots over the thing for the different links and stuff. Or iframes. There was a big iframe guy.
Or like image map, I think, was also like the part of the image is like clickable. All ancient technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you hover over, it swaps out the image, so you get like the hover effects. And
oh, that's right. Yeah, and then it would have to, but you'd see it download because you're on a 56K. I mean, the websites back then were heavier than they are even today. We worry so much about like speed and stuff, but I mean, we fire in megabytes at these poor dial-up connections. But yeah, and so I just sort of left that for a bit when I went to uni, and then I picked up magazine design again, which led me back to website design as a job, which led me back into coding. And then in my first, one of my first jobs, like I had to pick up JavaScript for the first time through jQuery, and that's basically the way I got in. Now, probably a way that doesn't exist anymore, I guess. Like it was very much of its time, like that path.
So you started more on the designer side and then came over to programming versus learning programming and then getting good at the design UI stuff.
Yeah, and it sort of happened a couple of times as well. Like there was when I was a kid and I'd end up doing more like more HTML, CSS stuff. But that was because I was like coming from the design. And then later on again, professionally, like I think it was my second job where I was like a Flash designer and I was designing gambling games essentially. I just take any job I can. I'm not saying I agreed with it morally, but I was going to be leaving London if I didn't get another job. So these games would sort of like get shipped out to some, I don't know, like some code house and then come back looking completely different. So like your silver buttons are now gold and all this. And so occasionally you'd sort of have to develop or dive into existing code and tweak them. And so it was like really through ActionScripts that I started getting my feet wet again. And then from there, my first real job was JavaScript. And the job after that, I was kind of like, oh, so do I get to do any design still? And they were like, no, you don't. Of course you don't. Like, that's a weird thing to ask. You're a developer now. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm a developer now. And so, yeah, my design skills sort of atrophied over the last decade. And now I'm just a full-time developer.
Interesting. So like Adobe Flash, so for everybody not knowing that anymore, because it doesn't exist, it's dead, right? Like how was that? Especially like ActionScript was like super close to JavaScript. So like how was writing ActionScript compared to JavaScript nowadays?
Well, I didn't know any different. So I'd never really written JavaScript at the time. So I'd sort of just dabble in that in GreenSock, which is also why I learned ActionScript a bit more, like to get things, like, because with some of the effects you can make with GreenSock were way ahead of what you could pull off in the editor, and also triggering them programmatically was a lot easier. So yeah, that was basically, I didn't feel like it set me up for great success with JavaScript either, because like all the things that I was doing, like at the time you couldn't do any of those things in CSS. Like for instance, like I was mostly making like blur animations or something like that, and then you try and perform something cool in CSS and JavaScript, and you couldn't do it at the time. Filter didn't exist. I think probably border radius probably didn't exist.
Most of the things didn't, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Not even transition. Like you didn't even have that, I'm sure, for during my first job. So a lot of it was more like logic and jQuery. And so the jQuery made things so much more easy compared to even ActionScript, that I didn't feel like at the time that it was like super familiar. But now when I look back, I'm like, oh, ActionScript 3 was basically, I mean, I think it maybe technically was JavaScript or had,
I think like, yeah, it was like a fork. Shared. It was like a fork of JavaScript or something, like the early days, something like that. Yeah, exactly. That's why I was also curious how that, like with the lens looking back now, felt like. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I think is there something called ECMAScript? This is ignorance. I don't know why I'm saying this out loud.
ECMAScript is the standard, right? So like JavaScript is basically the implementation of the ECMAScript standard, and I guess ActionScript was another one. I'm not sure if it was fully spec compliant, but at least back then to some degree, I think it was. But also things change over the time so much. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. So yeah, I feel like that was what that was. But yeah, and then obviously Flash died, and I just drifted more and more into JavaScript. And at some point, I had to. Did I have to learn React? I think there was a job I had where I was building a site, and I thought, fuck, I've always wanted to learn React. Let's use that, and I did. And then that's Frame of Motion sort of spun out of that originally, which is why it's so React heavy. Or so React focused, and now like obviously with Motion for Vue, that was more. I've done a small Vue implementation with Motion. It was a previous animation library called Motion One, but it was quite limited in scope. Whereas people, I think, really wanted the full Frame of Motion experience. So then this port was actually developed by someone else. I don't know why you got me on the show, to be honest, because the cool thing that I'm talking about today was actually built by someone else. But it's essentially taking the raw materials of Motion for React and re-implementing them in Motion for Vue. And yeah, I've used it. I mean, you know, luckily I've used it, documented it. So it works great. I know that much. Yeah.
For people who aren't familiar with Motion, Frame of Motion, can you give a quick description of what it does?
Yeah, so I think that the idea is that in the simplest use case, it's super simple, and you can basically write animations easier with this than you would be able to, in my opinion, within CSS or something. And then it scales all the way to there's nothing you can't make with it. And that's nice because when you learn like CSS from scratch, CSS animations or whatever, you'll get to a point where you're like, to do this thing, I now have to do. So like with CSS transition, you can use that for a bunch of things. And then you're like, but I can't use it to make this repeating animation. For that, I need to now. And then you have to change everything. Now you're using keyframes and you're using, and the animation comes with its own limitations and weird behavior. Whereas with Frame of Motion, there's no real, with Motion, there's no real, like, there shouldn't be any limitation. It should just be like a straight shot from knowing nothing. So doing your first animation, which is easy, like motion.div, animate X 100, like is the standard, or scale 1.2. You want a hover animation, while hover equals scale, 1.2 press equals 0.9. Now you've got a clickable button. So that's kind of the idea behind it, that everything should be made as simple as possible, but there should never be any limitations on what you can do with it.
I think that's a good one because, like, especially a lot of people think, oh yeah, but CSS has animation. So yeah, the simple API plus like that there is no showstopper at some point. So like, okay, now you have to switch to this more complex thing. But that's the superpower here, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. Because then as well, once you got past the things that CSS animations can do, now you're into the world of JavaScript. And for a lot of people, that's like super intimidating, especially if it's more imperative code. So just to have this declarative API that is accessible, like if you know how to write a HTML element, you can do like 90% of what frame motion or motion for React, motion for Vue, what the cool things that they do, you can already do them, like super advanced layout animations. You just have to add the layout prop or layout ID for shared element transitions. And these are things that used to be really difficult, but now they're, accessible to everyone.
Without like diving deep into like complex APIs, or then, as you said, like switching from one strategy to another because the certain thing you try doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose, I think there's a depth to the API. Like I want to keep things as shallow as possible, if you know what I mean. But because there's so much you can do, then there is a depth. There is a lot to learn, but you don't have to learn. I think you can. I'd like to keep the gradient basically like the 90% of people just need these couple props, and then as you get like more and more specialized, you end up dipping into more and more things. Like motion values is probably my favorite API, but also one that most people will never use. But it's basically, to quickly explain it, so it's essentially a little like signals and or observables. It's somewhere in that realm where you have these like just values that can be animated alone, but then they can be composed into like more complex values, and then they can be passed to one or more motion divs or motion. I keep saying motion div is the shorthand. Like you can have motion.html SVG element, but I'll probably just keep saying motion div. But that's not to say it's meant to be like accessible. Yes, use your judgment, obviously.
Semantic HTML, folks. We
exactly,
all know.
Yeah.
So I think any like good API is sort of designed like that, where it like the 90% use case, like 90% of the time, it's just like easy, straightforward, but it also has like this escape hatch kind of, maybe not, but like where like the abstraction and like the library doesn't limit you. So that you're like, oh, now I want to do this complicated thing. I either have to like hack my way around this library or throw it out and now I have to implement my own thing. But it's like, oh, actually, there's this other part that you can just like dig into. You can pull back the curtain kind of and like dive into it. And you didn't need to know this before, but like for this really advanced edge case that you need to implement, you can just keep going with the same tool and you don't have to throw it out and start over. You can just, take that next step.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you feel like is Vue like that? Because like I've only used Vue 3, and I don't know that there's like competing APIs, and there's like the composable API versus the is this a big discussion in the Vue community? Like where you can start using this and then you end up using this, or where's that at the moment?
I think like it depends who you ask, of course, but a lot of people like they adapt it. They use the composition API. They know it's the way forward. There are also a lot of people who really don't want to bother with a more, let's say, flexible API and prefer that the options API has like these groups where like, okay, my data comes, like my state gets into data and my computer properties go into computed and methods there and so on. So especially if you're not like, let's say, a full-time front-end dev and don't want to dig into like all the complex things, but like, hey, I want to have a very simple way of doing things. They don't want to think where to put the stuff. I just want to have a lot of guidance there. I think like the Vue Options API can be quite a benefit because it gives exactly that. But I would say like nowadays with Vue 3, a lot of people use the composition API and also see the benefits, though sometimes it takes a while. But there are also enough people, as I said, like they're like, okay, I'm good with the Options API. Both will be supported, nothing will be removed. So that's a benefit in the end there. But of course, like modules, like NPM packages can decide if they say, okay, we only have composables, then, well, that's up to you then.
Right, I see, yeah.
I see Nuxt as more that of like the really simple, if you just need it to be simple, but then as you need more features, it gets more complex and you can like dig deeper and deeper and deeper.
That's true.
Like you can start out with just a single page app inside of a single component, and it will ship only that code. And then if you want to do server-side rendering, well, then you get that. If you want to do routing, it'll add that in. If you want to, have optimized images, you start to use Nuxt image and it'll like auto install the package for you and do all the optimizations, and you don't have to think about the transforms and resizing happening on the server. And like you can kind of keep going deeper and deeper, and it like kind of just like unfolds gracefully. And I really like that approach, because it's not like, you have to have like this complex architecture if you're building a Nuxt app. You can start really basic and it just scales with you. So I really like that about it.
I think like for Vue in a way, it also is, if you can start with a script tag, right? If you need a build step, then you can go for that. Of course, if you build like a whole front end, then you usually want to build step, but you don't have to. If you just want to replace jQuery, then maybe that's also a good step forward. And then at some point when you see, oh, it's all Vue, then yeah, you can continue with that and say, let's actually have a build step. Let's get all the benefits in. It's also something I think we rarely see nowadays, because everything is JSX based. Well, you either have a build step or you don't use JSX, which is a bit of a pain. So that's definitely interesting to see that Vue is, I think, like the only major framework that can just run from a script tag with almost all its power.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about making APIs, but also the hard thing is like it's like a constant puzzle of like how much do you reveal, like when you're onboarding someone, like you don't want to scare them off with all these
advanced
new
things.
concepts.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, and like definitely when I first started writing, so I started writing this like 10 years ago. Oh god, I'm so old. As
we all are.
motion. Yeah. We're older by the end of this podcast. That's never stops ticking. That was like a vanilla API, and I introduced all these weird concepts, like new words, and I don't know, things that made sense in my head, but like probably didn't make. And so as that went on, like it was just like a thing of like a puzzle of, or journey of like simplifying things and concepts and removing things that people don't care about or need to know. You know, things that I would have made an explicit API for, made a big deal of in the documentation, I now like almost ignored. Like for instance, like I had like a whole way of targeting whether you were going to be animating styles or attributes or whatever, and you had the special dedicated keywords for this. It was all, I won't get into it, but anyway, the point is that now is like I don't think I've written about that in so long, because you use an emotion div. Well, we know that you're animating styles, for instance.
So in this case, just infer it, then you know it already.
Exactly.
But yes,
but that's a good that's how it should be. Like, what was I doing? But you only know that because like now that you've got experience, and you know that this is like, so that's the thing. Like you're just learning this whole time, and I feel like it's in a good place now where that a lot of the things that are, don't need to be shown on, and then all the other things are presented but in simple packages, like the emotion value stuff. Like these are signals, but I feel like people shouldn't need to know what a signal is, so I'm not going to go. I think I mentioned the word once, and I'd probably take that out. But it's like a signal. But I don't like that I've written that. I think it should just be like, this is a value. You can listen to it, and then you can change the way something looks when it changes. Like, done. Like, that's all that people need to know.
I've learned this the hard way with creating content and writing articles and stuff like that, and like even like certain topics where it's like super theoretical, almost like really abstract, and it's like interesting to me, and it's like no one cares. No one wants to know like about like how to structure theory behind state management or whatever, and it's like people just want to know how to make it not suck when they're developing day to day and like a tangled state and whatever. They just want to know like, how do I make this easier on myself? And and like these details of things, it's like, well, there are some people who care about those details, and I'll put that at the very bottom of the article of like, oh, by the way, this is how this is implemented. But 80% of people probably just want to figure out how to get the thing done so they can close their ticket and get to lunch. So
No, exactly. Yeah, I went down a whole functional programming rabbit hole, and there was a version of Pop Motion that
yeah,
was like
that happens.
very like yeah, exactly. It does feel like my angsty teenager phase of my professional development. There'd be this way that you could compose these chains. So you have the animation, and the animation doesn't do anything by default because you have the full freedom to output these values any way you like, and you can build these. You can pipe, and so you don't have you didn't have default values by default. So if you animate like X10, well, okay, now you can put that through a function that adds the pixels string. So now you've got 10 pixels, and you can pass that to something that outputs it on this element as the the width property or something. And like, yeah, looking back, I'm like, what the fuck was it? And I think it was one day that I was reading an article and it said something, and I don't know what this is, but a monad.
Oh, yeah. Now we're really into functional programming.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay. Well,
Yes,
so
yes.
this must have been the same thing. So it was. I think I read the word monad, and I just remember thinking, I don't give a fucking shit what that means. I actually thought that, and like that's so that I was actually quite comfortable at being like I was like I would like to remain ignorant. Like this is the limit of how much I care about the subject, and at that moment I had the realization that that's how people feel when they're reading through my API docs, but like way sooner about way more things. Like everyone has it
Absolutely.
about something, and so I just thought, man, I've got to get rid of all of this, like, and I just got to make it as easy as possible because it's already the thing that you're trying to do is already the hard thing. Like if your thing is database security, or I don't know what it is, but like when it's animations, people are already struggling with like how to make a nice animation, and so it's like, well, okay, we'll figure that out. What am I doing with all these like pipes and I don't know any other things.
I think
anyway,
it's so interesting because you want to basically like enable that people can do amazing animations, and they don't have to be like functional programming experts to make that happen. So ideally you want something that works for them like intuitively in a way. For functional programming, it always feels like you have to jump through a couple of hoops, and if you like let's say you have these 1,000 Lego blocks and you have to put them together nicely, then you get something out of it. While probably for something that's also focused more towards people, let's say animations more, well, let's say the creative and art part, not the like theoretical, maybe more logical, mathematically part. Not saying you don't need math for animations because there are a lot of use cases. But then you also figured out, look, this is my target audience, and I don't want to like bore them with all the functional programming concepts and rather make it convenient for them, intuitive to use. Which still probably means you have a lot of knowledge of like, okay, how do I design it so it works well and also performant? But you don't have to force your end users to know all that.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes it's like there'll be concepts that are useful, like or even especially when it comes to performance, animation is a good example of it. Like knowing not to. I think a naive approach would be making everything would be immutable. Like if we were to take the trends of like the last 5 years and you were to write an animation library in that way, you'd be like, because you want to make it easy to read. So you'd be nesting for each functions and stuff. And then you'd be pumping out new objects every frame. But that is a disaster in terms of performance. So you need to, so actually things are written with like for normal, if there's a loop, then it's a for I equal. Do you know what I mean? And there's
classic for loop.
Massive like mutability going on in there. Which do I feel grubby? Of course I do. But I know when I see the memory consumption that's better than I've seen it with other implementations. So yeah, it's not like you need to be ignorant of every programming thing, but I think it's when these like I think it's good for you to know a lot of these things. I still don't think I need to know what a monad is, but it's good for me to know a lot of these things. But yeah, ideally, I'm actually here to shield the user from those things. Like I want them to not stuff their brain with all this stuff because I don't know what else they have going on. I don't know what problems they're trying to solve. They're just trying to solve animating this one thing when they come to me. So I'm just going to stop. Like we're only going to be talking about animation. We're not going to be talking about programming. Like you see it. Like a good example. Like if you ever choose using the Web Animations API, you can do like a element.animate opacity 0 to opacity 1, like naively, like what would you expect that element to be when the animation finishes?
Well, from 0 to 1, so it should be fully visible, right?
Yeah, exactly. It will be invisible
Yes.
because
Naively,
that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, naively. Yeah, no, I know whether or not you knew. Like, it is a trick question, but and then you've got like two ways that you can solve it essentially. And one is like using this commit styles, so you can cancel the commit styles and then cancel the animation. That'll leave behind the one style, or you can leave the animation essentially running, but with the fill mode forwards. And I'm like reading this, I'm like, this is insane. Like, this is nuts. Like, what? You know, I'm not naming names, but like, I'm just saying, like, let's just solve this and like make sure that no one has to think about this ever again, because intuitively that isn't how that should work, basically. Yeah. So that's a practical.
And maybe there's a good analogy to jQuery that you mentioned before, where back then, like jQuery basically unified all the different ways browsers are doing things. Like, here's an easy way, an accessible way to do that, and it will work the same everywhere. Now with standards, of course, it's not that much necessary, but maybe in terms of animation, like here, it's pretty obvious you want to have, like, you want to animate, let's say, the opacity, and well, motion is handling all the difficult part, maybe all the caveats, all the weird parts for you, so you don't have to think about it or maybe research why your element is not visible. It
exactly,
just
yeah. That's the idea. Like let's say cross-browser stuff these days. Like there was a phase where like WAPI was in a state where you'd need to do certain things to make sure it worked great cross-browser, but that's not really the case anymore. But yeah, I have thought of it sometimes. It's like the jQuery of, but at least that part of it, the wraps the browser APIs. That's the sort of jQuery of web animations APIs, scroll timeline, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So you mentioned pop motion and framer motion and motion, so name-wise. So maybe it's a good point to like go at least a little bit into the history, because you said before, like, okay, pop motion kind of started as like your side project, so to say, and eventually it became framer motion, and now it's just motion. So can you briefly explain how did all of that happen?
Yeah, so pop motion was my first side project, really, the first one that I took seriously. And I started doing it because I wanted to write a book about, like, I've got certain like feelings and thoughts on animations and UIs, and I thought it'd be good to write a book about that. Like, maybe just a small, nothing like good, but like, you know, like it's just maybe a small course or long blog. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, I was coming to like do all these examples, and I thought there was nothing. A lot of it involved spring physics, and there was no good API for that. So I still wasn't when I wrote pop motion, but after I finished that, that set me on the path, and that was like a completely like renderless. And then I'd add in a library for rendering to the DOM or rendering to 3JS and stuff like that. But then it was only when there was that, and then I wrote one called Pose, which was essentially a declarative layer on top of pop motion for React. And it was
pop motion was fully vanilla, and then Pose was basically the React wrapper, so to say.
Yeah, there was also a Vue. It was for Vue as well.
Okay, nice.
This is a long time ago, but yeah, and I think I stopped supporting it. Oh, maybe it was part of going to Framer. So at some point, I went Framer. There was a version of Framer back in the day. And so for people who don't know, Framer is like a website building tool, but the interface is a lot more like a Figma, like a sort of traditional design tool. But you can press publish and you've got a website. The motion.dev website is made in Framer. And but back in the day, they were a prototyping tool. And when they came out with their latest version, which was based on React, you could actually like open up the code editor and sort of like hack around. So I copy pasted Pose into that and started making animations in the prototypes. And then I got a DM like a few days later, next day from Kuhn, who runs Framer, and he was like, "Oh, do you want a job?" Basically, it wasn't that easy. Like there was a few more checks than that, but that's also how I ended up in Amsterdam originally. So I was there for 6 years writing Framer Motion, which was like in some ways it was like a spiritual successor to Pose, but also incorporated pop motion as a direct dependency. So it was very much a continuation of that. And then like a few years into that, I had like an idea for something based purely on browser APIs after trying to write another book. And I'd run into so many stumbling blocks using Web Animations API that I thought there was space for like a jQuery So that includes things like interrupting animations, animating independent transforms, and these things aren't that easy with WAPI still. So I just thought like a tiny wrapper, maybe 3 kilobytes, something like that. See how much I can get out of it. Can I get spring animations in there? It was a bit of an exercise and experiment. And so that was motion one. And then all of that ended up over the next couple of years sort of making its way into frame of motion anyway. So all of the techniques that I'd sort of built, so frame of motion subsumed that in a sense. And then when I left Framer to take this independent, I sort of everything, there was a whole vanilla JS API that was already usable and public. Like it's just that no one used it. And like everyone thought that frame of motion was a React API. So in the announcement, I was like, this is a great time just to say like, and now it incorporates motion one and it's a vanilla API. But that was all kind of nonsense because like, it'd been going for years, but like no one, it was just a way of like rebranding it essentially. It's like, now
it's a way of framing as well, right? Like if you now be like, hey, look, this is like, you can use it with React. There won't be any changes. That's not frame of motion. It's just motion now. And it also works for JavaScript. It's already a different feeling to people. Feeling like, hey, this is more framework agnostic now, even though it was before and people just didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just coinciding that announcement with this is now independent, it almost gives it the air of like, oh, because it's independent, now you can use it. Like there's this whole JavaScript API. It's like, I wasn't limited in that way at all. Like, so I think it helped drive the point
for sure
into people's like perceptions basically of what motion is. And then it was about 6 months later, I think, that Rick, who runs Motion for Vue, I saw his project. It was like, I think it was called Motion V or something.
Motion V, yeah.
And he'd basically just taken the whole thing and made a full implementation of Motion for React, but for Vue, using the same. It's all the same internals. And I was just like, if I sponsor you, you can remake this public, like or official, sorry. And he was super up for it. And he's just he's been an amazing maintainer, like, which is the only reason this has happened really, because I don't think. Like I've made Vue implementations before, but like I'm very comfortable with React. Whereas I didn't know if I was to do Motion for Vue, I was talking to Evan about this. I was like, this is going to take me a year. I'm only going to be able to have like a few days a month able to do this. I'm going to have to refactor the whole thing, because I'm going to move. And I have been slowly refactoring more and more out of the frame of motion package, which is like the React bit, and into its own package, so we can more safely do things like Motion View. But he'd already done it, and I was like, wow, it takes a certain mind. This is the guy that you want writing the official Motion for Vue. It's the same way there's no like Motion for Solid or Motion for Svelte. I'm not open to it, but it would take someone like this to be able to make it possible.
So that basically means if there's someone out there saying, hey, I'm super into motion, I use it for a lot of things, and I use Solid, Svelte, Angular, whatsoever, then you'd be open like, hey, let's work together, let's make that happen.
Yeah, I'd be open to it, but it does like, so this is, I don't want to sound too mercantile, but it's like a business now as well. So I'd have to see, because, I could be left holding the bag. There's that dimension to things, and I'd like to not pull support for something. So I want to make sure it's something that has the numbers for a start. Like, I sponsor Rick, but really I'm getting funded by Motion Plus sales. So I need to know that I'm getting at least the Motion Plus income from a Vue implementation that can pay for the sponsorship. And I want that to be as much as possible, because like he's doing, I love what I'm doing, and I want to make sure that if someone's making a motion for something, that they at least have a subsidizing, like a chunk. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
So, and I can say now after a month of this that it is making that money. So I'm comfortable, but it's also given me like a calibration of how many Motion Plus sales do I need to make versus the size of the audience that framework integration will bring. And Vue is of that size, but like it's felt like, I don't know, like is Solid? Probably not. Like, so that and Angular, like, again, I don't actually know, but with Angular, but the fact that I don't know, it's not great. No, it's probably looking at all of them, but I don't know, literally ignorant of this. But anyway, that's the equation that comes into this.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about how this Motion Plus thing works and how like you're supporting this whole project and the revenue and all that kind of, not necessarily the specific revenue, but just like in general how you're doing this.
So I guess when I started this out, like I wanted to make the I didn't want to turn on the money thing, but like I wanted to make as wide a pipe almost so that I didn't have to worry about this again. So for me, that involved getting money from the companies that use Motion and the people that use Motion. And for me, there's like very different things. Like, so the companies, some companies will be open, like you need to hit people like people will pay for things that they can't have. They're not going to pay for sponsorship in the same way. So with Motion One, like I managed to get like not like a wage or anything, but I was surprised by what you could make because Motion One wasn't publicly available. It was fully behind a paywall to begin with. And at that point, sponsorships were relatively healthy, like not a nice like side project income. I was like really happy with it. And then when I launched Motion, within a week, I could tell that company sponsorships were great, but I had to go after most of those companies. Like that was the other thing. So I put my business hat on, and I knew I'd already built up a list. I knew who was using it, and I was like, look, I'm getting independent. I need your support. And we've got great traffic on motion.dev. So if you've got your logo there, this is going to give you, 200,000. But a lot of these companies are so big they don't care about that. So it's more about supporting the project. But so there was the companies that support, and then for people, I had to the personal sponsorships and frame motion's like I'd say fairly big, and the sponsorships is basically nothing. And so I was like, oh shit, I've got to find something quickly to figure this part of the income out. So that's when I started making the examples website, which was primarily, like to begin with, it was just to host everything that I had on Code Sandbox. I ported to examples, Motion examples. So examples.motion.dev, and that you can go on there and you can look at the source code, and some of them have tutorials and stuff. But then I wanted to start making a bunch of new examples that are like a bit more involved or a bit more specific. So the ones that are teaching you the fundamentals, they're completely free and you can look at the source. But I wanted to make some that were like more opinionated or more design focused. So I've had people like I've commissioned a few and or made a few different ones basically. So there's like over 100 now, and they're split fairly evenly between JavaScript, Vue, and React.
Are the same available for 3 as well, or are there like some only for React or Vue or JavaScript?
React and Vue have mostly parity because the APIs are the same.
True.
But JavaScript, because the API is a bit smaller, I've done my best to bring as many over, but some of them rely on layout animations, which are they're just a different tool than the Vue animations API. So there's certain things that I've been able to match and some things that I've done my best with. So I think there's overall fewer for vanilla, but React and Vue are pretty well supported equally. Yeah, so putting just even a few behind a paywall was enough to start getting some sales. And to begin with, it was just diehard people, like big fans of Motion. And you also get access to a Discord. And then I started layering in some private APIs and early access as well. So just today, I launched some early access, like a reactive API. I was talking about motion values earlier. A couple more like transform value, map value, sort of more composable, more hardcore, like these are the don't tell the initial users, but like for the advanced users, this sort of thing. And style effect, which is like here's the motion values, like link them to this element or these elements, like a more of a composable API. That's I don't want to keep that private forever, but that's in early access, so you get it a month ahead of everyone else. And likewise, there's one called split text, which you can use in it's vanilla, but you can use it in React and Vue. And there's examples showing you how to do that. That's always going to be Motion Plus. So there's this whole mix of, it's basically a really mixed offering, but it's a one-time fee and you get access to all of the updates going down the line. And at this point, I'd say that the value proposition is like enough that I'm happy with the sales, basically. It's not like explosive like you hear, so, like Tailwind is kind of famous for Tailwind UI. It's definitely not in that league, but it's enough.
Tailwind Plus nowadays, they also rebranded that for a good reason.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think like having that much stuff, like I can say that all those different things contribute to, at least looking at the stats, they seem to all contribute to this offering. And so I'd say that now I can live off this, and so I can carry on doing Motion for as long as the sales keep up and the sponsorships stay there. I can carry on doing this for as long as I want, which is like probably forever because I really enjoy
That's
it.
the dream.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It really is. It's the dream.
Yeah.
That's what I sort of pinched myself.
Quick check. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I've got this hoodie on, because you don't want to see all the pinch marks and like constantly like.
So I think Motion Plus, like we talk a lot about open source sustainability. We had like a whole episode. So for all listeners who didn't catch that, definitely checked it out. And like with a lot of people, because we're also, of course, big open source, fans and contributors as well. So monetization in terms of Motion Plus is something that definitely caught my eye, because it's very different to like the usual way of doing things. Because you already mentioned, for example, Tailwind UI or now Tailwind Plus with, hey, here you have a product, you can pay for it. So like access and forever. But in your case, you basically say, okay, there are a lot of parts that are basically time gated. So you can look at that in 30 days for free, or you can check it out now and have to like be part of that Motion Plus program. And that's also a one-time fee, right?
Yeah.
So how was your experience from like the community or like people in general? Was this something that people were like happy about, or was it a system they kind of found weird at the beginning, and maybe where is that right now?
I'd say for me, like, at least from what I've seen, like directed at me, the response has been like overwhelmingly positive. I think people find it quite easy to imagine that there's a core API, and it's actually most of the API. Like if you go on, there's very few gated things. There's a couple of early access things, but when you look in, like very few, but enough that it's like, oh, I want to pay for, oh, that's a cool extra thing.
Yeah.
But it's clearly not part of the core library. Things that I want to be part of the core library, those are the things that only get early access. And on the whole, it's been positive. Sometimes you get a comment, so like I'll share like an example, and like the comment will be like, oh, this guy's even price gated the fucking example, and you're like, I get it, because what I've done is shared this example, and you go in and you click on the source code and it comes up with a paywall, but with the broader context of here's 100 examples and all these fundamentals are free, it makes more sense. It's not like, so it's funny because I don't want people to feel like there's nothing on there if you don't pay. It's actually quite the opposite. And so if your first exposure is this gated example, but I also need the gated examples to do promotion. So that's I don't know, it's like an interesting dynamic. But even that, like very few people have communicated that to me still. So I think people get it on the whole. And the early access is, like I did very early on, like almost to shatter the people's like, to really like drive home that this is independent now. I did like a Webflow integration guide. So obviously Webflow, big competitor to Framer, which is like the old, this is where it came from. Now what you can do in Webflow is like kind of limited. You can only use the JavaScript API. It's more like an answer to the GSAP Webflow guide. So I mean, you can't compare how the two are integrated. But I published that because I had nothing else at the time. This is like week 3. I published that as early access. And there were definitely from the Webflow community people who were like, this is insane. How could you charge 300 quid for a Webflow guide? I'm like, well, I am and I'm not. Like, I'm not charging for the guide. This is one thing and it's early access. So yeah, you know, you get all these other things. But at the time, there was a lot less other things. So it didn't make as much sense. And also, I think if I did it again, APIs come in with early access, but I probably wouldn't have made an integration guide early access, because if you're a Webflow guy, you're probably, or you know, a Webflow person, like you're coming into this fresh and you're like, this is your first exposure. Obviously, I'm not going to pay 300 quid for, but you want that person to start using it, and then you get. But in my head, it was like, well, no, I'm charging my existing. These are people who like, but those people didn't exist. There was no Venn diagram where you're an existing motion person and you were like a Webflow. I don't know. It was dumb, but it was also a learning. I was happy that it happened, and I just felt that the damage here is basically zero because it is early access and everyone else gets it in 2 weeks. So I don't know what you're complaining about.
Yeah, and you always got to try things out, and
Sure does.
There's never like a perfect way of doing things. So.
Yeah, exactly.
And also like iterating. It's like, okay, that worked or that didn't work, or maybe the messaging has to be clear and so on and so on. Yeah, like I can only remember there was like, I heard a lot of good things as well when, I think it was in November last year when like motion, like not Framer Motion, but Motion, formerly known as Framer Motion, was like announced going independent, and then the early access stuff comes up. I remember like there was I can't really pinpoint it. There was like one big Twitter discussion where like at least someone was like, oh yeah, how is it possible? Like, as you said, and then a lot of people were like, hey, this is a great way to like try out a different way of monetizing open source. And I agree, especially with the part that like, hey, this is available. If you have no urgent thing, or if you don't want to put it on your site right now, but in 2 weeks, it's all fine. It's great. Or like if you don't want to have access to all the other things there, that's okay. You can use it. It's not like gated in a certain way. So glad to hear that that way of monetizing was successful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And I also just say, like, the whole thing, the core of this really came out of discussions with Adam from Tailwind. Like, so that kind of a conversation I had with him, like in, I don't know, the start of last year, like it really put me on a path towards all this happening. And the one-time fee is directly attributable, you know, even if this implemented, even if things are different, like, you know, early access, for instance, that was very much like his model that I'm emulating. So, and I just say that just to, yeah, I think it's something that more projects could do, because this is a livable, like I'm lucky enough that this is actually like, because when I was doing pop motion and I was running off sponsorships before I moved to Framer, I think I got up to like 300 quid a month, which is obviously like not going to pay the bills. So
not at all. No.
It's hard one to get. I've essentially been incubated for 6 years at Framer, which is not something that's open to a lot of people. But somewhere between that and here is like a whole array of like good side incomes or even livable wages. And then beyond that, obviously you get into Tailwind money, but like, you know, there's at least like partial salaries in this kind of thing for smaller libraries or libraries that are the same size. But like, I'm just saying there's a lot more flexibility here.
For sure.
And I think, yeah.
And I mean, people should try it out. So that's why, like, it's interesting to see that, especially we're all tired of subscriptions, right? It's not another subscription. It's also one more thing. And then seeing, hey, these one-time payments work out is such a great news. Also, to, as you said just before, a lot of other people out there, a lot of other open source maintainers who might look into or like struggle doing that for even partial, like part-time. So maybe that's also a good point to, for everybody listening, having a library and thinking of what could there be a way to make that work out, while not like gatekeeping everything behind a big paywall. Like, here is the course that you have to buy to understand everything. Well, the early access thing works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, early access. Plus, you know, there are gated APIs. Plus,
sure,
you know, so definitely like the course. A course. I like that idea as well. Like if you've got like something, I know AnimeJS is going to come out of the like they launched and the homepage is incredible, and so everyone's like, oh wow, you know, this homepage is blowing my mind, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to sell a course. I'm going to build a course now that teaches you how to build this homepage. That's an amazing, like, I'm hoping that that's another, you know, but things like this are what's needed. And it does take your focus away from doing the open source thing as well.
That's the other point, right? With actual content for the docs, it's like, hey, I write that and it will benefit all the people at some point. So it's not like lost time for like not working on the open source part.
Yeah, and it's also, even though these things are gated, like certain things, like a course like that, for instance, I still think its existence makes the ecosystem more vibrant. It brings something to this. Like before I went independent, I'd say that, you know, Frame Motion, like in a sense, like I was doing it, but I was doing it in service of like, oh, like how can we get more performance out of Framer, blah, blah, blah. But now this is an amazing motion example website with all these crazy examples that people can play with. And even if they're not paying for the source code for some of these, that maybe they're getting inspired and they're like, oh, I could build something like that. Or just the community that exists on Discord now. I don't know. I feel like this paywall stuff, like I don't see it now as like, oh, I've spent 2 days making this example, therefore I've wasted my time. It's like, actually, I'll come away for a bunch of ideas, or I found this bug, and so there is a lot to it. I think, that's healthy for the project.
There's I think there are a lot of examples of people doing like similar kinds of things. Like Caleb Porzio comes to mind with Alpine and Livewire, and he has the open source projects, and then you pay for screencasts, and I think he's got a component library now that he's working on too. And so like lots of like different variations of like the same main idea here. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm sure more people will follow with this kind of model.
I know, I'm excited to see what sort of things, because like it feels like quite hopeless a lot of the time, not now, but like I feel like I over the years I felt like, oh, it's a shame that we need to do something like this in, I have to be at Framer, or like the React team has to be at Facebook or Vercel. Like, it's a shame that this is the way it is. But like with models like this, it's like there's a possibility for at least a few more, like there's more projects can be self-sufficient, which is nice.
And it makes the project better too, because
Exactly.
you're able to focus, you're independent, you're able to focus on all of these extra examples and things, like helping people figure out how to use it in the best way.
Yeah, exactly. No, I really think, because I feel like the motivations of what you're doing, it's more when it's like for your employer, it's just different. It's just different. And it's not like, it's nicer to do it for, because you and then you also get a bit more passion as well, because you're like, well, this is my business now. If this isn't good, I'm going to have to find a job, like a different job, or I don't know. You've got a lot more of yourself in it. And so you're excited to be finding things that resonate, even if it's an example or a feature, anything. Yeah, it's a different mindset, and it's definitely brought the project back to life for sure.
Have you ever thought about other ways of monetizing motion? For example, like dual licensing, saying, oh, if your company, I don't know, let's say business source license is a very common thing, or like fair source, what also was mentioned a couple of episodes ago. So basically saying, hey, here you can use it unless your company earns more than, I don't know, 10 million average yearly or annual recurring revenue, then you have to, I don't know, get a license or similar. Have you thought about something like that?
So I really didn't want to change the license for motion just because it's MIT, and I didn't want to rug pull on anyone, which is why I said anything new, I'll do what I want. But like anything that exists, like will always remain MIT. So that there was that part of the thinking, but then also with Motion Plus APIs, they're actually MIT, so it's really the documentation. I wanted it to be like that because I just don't want people to feel like, oh, but if I buy it, can I use it in this sort of project or this sort of project? And a lot of these things, you buy the thing and it's like, you can't use it for professional, like you can't use it on this agency site. If you want to use it on more than one site, you've got to buy a license for each of these things. I'm like, this is nonsense. I just like, what? I'm not like, I don't know. For me, it was just cooler or more fun, like not to have to think about all the licensing and just be like, if you buy it, just use it. See you later. I have a like, please don't just take the source code and whack it straight on a GitHub and say this is where. Do you know the don't be a dickhead clause? But that's like an implicit. I haven't had to tell anyone or ask anyone not to do that. And the other thing is like a lot of these bigger companies who might want to sponsor motion. I'm talking to one company at the moment that might become a sponsor, and they've got this whole license check system that it doesn't work well with, and it's just like this is complexity that I don't really need. So easier just to keep it like that and gate all of the examples and the GitHub and things like that. Just make it obfuscate this as a product. And then, but the one thing that worries me is like the AI/no code generators. Like the more that they use motion, essentially, they're sort of taking like users away from, maybe they're not, I don't know how it works, but like there's something in that about how these people aren't probably going to come to motion.dev because they're getting the AI to do it all for them. Or likewise, the no code, they don't even know that it's motion powering. Like most Framer people, they don't know that motion's powering the sites. So while I want the motion core library to be MIT, there's something in like, is there some way that I can say to a no code, like if you want to offer these APIs via your AI editor or something, and it's one of these Motion Plus APIs that's gated, or even do you want to train your AI tool on all of these gated examples like that, and then now you've got like a really good like motion builder AI. Yeah, I don't know. Is there something in being able to charge them like a font foundry would charge the design tools? Like they'd be just coming up into a meeting being like, can you give me 3 mil a year to offer this to your users? Like that's the sort of conversation they're having. Like, is there a font? I don't need 3 mil, but like I'm just saying, like, is there some way of licensing it with these sorts of companies? Not the whole thing, but like if they want to offer, like, yeah, exactly. If they want to offer split text, is there a way of like licensing that? Maybe not, but I don't know. But it's just a thought that I've had because I worry about these. I worry about AI. I think it's a net positive in terms, very specifically speaking about coding, but like specifically talking about Motion Plus. I'm like, is there essentially like a deadline that I have to, because after that, the AI will just be so good that no
You
one will
don't
need
check the
to.
docs. You don't take a look there. Just generate it for me. Yeah.
Exactly. Like I don't even need split text, or I don't even need, because like split text took me like a week to make. Would an AI make it in much quicker time? Maybe not yet, but
But
I
maybe in the
think
future.
I
Yeah.
have thought of
exactly.
like smaller libraries that are just there for convenience, like these like little utils that you often build that maybe someone puts them into a library and you're like Lodash, for example, or something like that, where it's like, I don't need Lodash anymore if I'm using AI because it can just, like, I don't need to have a pick method or whatever other thing from Lodash because the AI will just like rewrite it in line and
Yeah.
or have it extract it into my own util and then I have the code. I think that's probably going to happen at some point that like it'll just like write the animations, but I think that's probably a long way off because it's quite complex and there's like all sorts of like performance optimizations and other things that you're dealing with in it. It
I
doesn't
feel like
Yeah.
know what
This.
a good animation looks
like a
yet.
Lodash is
Yeah.
probably also easier to replace than like a
Yeah.
motion or also other
Oh
animation
yeah.
libraries
Oh
as
yeah.
well. But sure, it could be that you like even say, hey, I'll take a bit of time instead of using something that's maybe gated. So like, okay, I try AI generate me something like that, similar to that style. That could be possible.
Yeah, because that doesn't even need to work. Like, I've got this thing, it's tested, and like we've got this, and it works with these options. But you don't need it to do everything. You just need it to do the one thing you're doing, and it only needs to do that
Mm-hmm.
without bugs. So maybe that's like the bar's a little lower as well for the AI generation. But as someone, I use Cursor, and so I find it a good litmus test of like, am I doing something worthwhile? Like, can the AI generate it for me? And if it can't, then I find that it's probably a good one. Not generate it for me, but do you know what I mean? Like, how helpful has it been when I'm making this? And if
Yeah.
it's not been very helpful, then I feel like safe. Like, oh, okay, this is a good thing that people are
Yeah.
going to get value from. If it does too good a job, then I'm like, this is like this isn't.
It's waste of
not,
time. Yeah, I can just
yeah,
like,
it's a
oh,
waste of
yeah,
time.
yeah. No, that's a good point actually. That's a nice way of seeing that. I also think like the whole licensing part, just to come to that quickly, like I really like that approach of saying like, hey, I don't want to bother with like also the legal consequences and everything. Just saying like, hey, look, no rug pull, keep it as it is. It was open source. It should be open source before. Sure, like gate certain parts, but then focus on the documentation there, and yeah, avoid all the hassle with the rest. So I think it's really great to see, and
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that in a way. Like, not saying that any other approach is wrong, but especially as we said before, also with the early access part, that this is basically you found your way how to do that, and also like following along with the topic of like no code, low code, or like other companies in training could be super interesting, nice B2B opportunity that make things easier for you as well.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see how it goes out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe one more thing, because you mentioned AnimeJS, for example, GSAP, and so on. So on. How, maybe for everybody, maybe people heard that before, not tried out many animation libraries, or seen a few. How would you say motion is different to like AnimeJS or GSAP?
Yeah, I would say that the fundamental thing that makes motion different is that it's built. It's like I'll call it the hybrid engine, and so with most JavaScript animation libraries, you're running everything in a JavaScript. They've got their own custom animation runner, and the new anime has a WAPI thing, but it's like it's an entirely separate function. Whereas motion will select the best. So the JavaScript runners are actually better, I think, in terms of performance than WAPI if you have a lot of animations. So we use that for most animations. But if something can be hardware accelerated, then we pass that to WAPI automatically. Likewise, with the scroll animations, we use the scroll timeline if the options allow, but you'll never know which it's using. It's just like it's almost like a performance optimization. The same way, like if you use WAPI or CSS animations, you don't always know if they're hardware accelerated or not. They'll try to be, but for instance, in Safari, if you have like a certain repeat option, then it will de-opt onto the main thread. Motion takes that same approach, where if we can support it with hardware acceleration, then we'll do that. But I've just released a refactor. It's not a feature release as such, but it will allow me to do more things like oh, this is actually a really complex value. It's got a bunch of CSS functions in it, a bunch of CSS variables or something. And we can all animate this a CSS variable, but when you've got a string that contains lots of them, what I'll do is make it so that we pass those to WAPI. So you can interpolate way more things than normal JavaScript animation libraries. And again, like taking in the whole angle of simplicity, like this should be opaque. Like you shouldn't need to know that we're doing this. I think that's a fundamental. And also just like, I think the APIs are like simple. Like, and I think Anime's pretty simple as well. Whereas GSAP's a little bit more, I don't know, it's just an aesthetic thing. And I think that a lot of people love it. So there's that. But for me, I just prefer the aesthetics of motion. But then, as I would, but then it'd be horrible if I didn't.
Yeah,
but
it
then,
would be weird.
I failed and don't use it. I wouldn't use it. That could be the catch of the episode. But then obviously you've also got like motion for Vue, motion for React, which are like these are both integrated into the libraries. And way ahead of anything like I don't think there's any other animation library that offers such like deep integration and a native feeling API. So like you use it the same way that you'd use any declarative API, and they're the stars almost, I think.
Sweet. Yeah, so for everybody who is looking into animation libraries or maybe already knows some, well, try out Motion. Give it a try, especially with Motion for Vue out there. The links to everything in the description, of course, as usual. And as it's open source, if you have anything, then, well, feature request and issue. That's how it goes. It's all up on GitHub. Yeah, I think then we can slowly but surely wrap up because we already talked for roughly an hour. And I think we covered Motion, not in its entirety, but we got a pretty good big picture here, I would say. Matt, is there anything that we didn't cover yet where you thought like, hey, let's mention that because that might be good to know?
No, just to say thanks for having me on. I've had a great time, conversation, and yeah.
Perfect.
Have a nice day, I guess. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in the show that you were planning on writing a book about your thoughts on UI and UX design. So maybe a future episode you can come back and like give us your hot takes on UX design and stuff and how to use animations.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I do because I don't think the book's getting written. The problem is if I try and start a new book, I'll end up with a new API. So I try not to.
Yeah.
Then let's do a hot take episode. And like, here's what people do wrong with animations, with UI UX. There's probably lots to cover anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good hour at least. So maybe we'll just publish the transcription as Motion Plus.
Yeah,
there you go.
Easy. There we go. Matt, then last question from our side. Where can people follow you along if they're interested in motion and animation, or maybe in the book, which probably won't come out, but probably some good takes?
Yeah. So if you go to motion.dev, in the footer, there's all the links like to Twitter and Blue Sky as well, if you're a Blue Sky person. So I'm on both of those. And so that's the best place.
Sweet. Also, we put them in the show notes or description, of course, but also the link to Motion Dev and everything we mentioned. Matt, thank you so much for your time, for coming on and sharing all around animation, motion, and your journey. Thank you so much. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, hope to have you on again in the future, of course. And for our listeners, if this is not the most recent episode, you know what to do. Just continue listening, and I hope the other one is in the queue. Otherwise, well, put them on. And if it's the last episode, well, then check out all the links we mentioned, check out the show notes, and, well, maybe also some older episodes, because there are quite some good ones. Anyway, until next time, see you.